Hello everybody, Jediwarlock here, and welcome back to another episode of WoW Rocks, where I examine some of the most geologically interesting areas in World of Warcraft. Today, we'll be exploring the Swamp of Sorrows, as well as its counterpart to the south, the Black Morass, nowadays known as the Blasted Lands. I'll be covering the general geography of these two zones, going into detail on some of the notable areas of the map, and taking into account all the geologic evidence to see how and why these lands came to exist on the world of Azeroth. So, with all that being said, let's get right into it and explore the world of Warcraft. Venturing into the Swamp of Sorrows reveals a landscape that is wild, sodden, and uncharted. A few paths snake through the marshy terrain, but they rarely lead to civilized places. The one exception is the newly rebuilt outpost of Stonard, a horde base for only the hardiest of adventurers. Swamp beasts, jaguars, and crocolisks stalk the land, making travel difficult, but there are also fouler things in the depths of the marsh, including cursed dragons and lost Draenei. A damp canopy of leaves blankets the swamp, trapping in moisture and giving the entire area a foggy atmosphere. In the east, the briny coastline is where murlocs and crawlers call home, a twisted inversion of the coasts off of the nearby Stranglethorn Vale. Another similarity to that zone is the swamp's troll presence. This tribe, a set of heretics who dwell within the sunken temple and perform forgotten rituals. To the south, the arid valley known as the Blasted Lands was not always so inhospitable. Over 25 years before Classic WoW, before the ominous Dark Portal warped the surrounding land, it was once known as the Black Morass. By definition, a morass is a lowland with poor drainage, which results in a buildup of stagnant swamp water hardly fit for civilization. It was here where Medivh, corrupted guardian of Azeroth, opened the Dark Portal and allowed the Orcish horde to invade. Over time, the demonic energies of the portal ruined the ecosystem, changing the morass into what players know it as today, the Blasted Lands. The Black Morass is still accessible in-game today by visiting the Caverns of Time, which is how Wowmaster was able to gather this footage for today's video. Visually, this area is almost identical to the Swamp of Sorrows, but it contains slightly different wildlife and was likely formed from different geologic processes, which I'll get to later. Before we investigate the past geology of these two zones, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the notable areas. Also known as the Temple of Atal Hakar, the sunken temple resides in the center of the Swamp of Sorrows. Holy site of the exiled Adalai troll priests, the temple once stood as a bastion of their power as they worked to summon the blood god Hakar to Azeroth. Ysera, the green dragonflight aspect, drowned the temple under the swamp over 1,000 years ago, but today the trolls are renewing their efforts to undermine their jailers and resurrect their god. Today, the vast majority of the temple is located underneath the swamp, showcasing both the formidable power of the dragons as well as the wet, unstable ground of the area. Only the pinnacle of the temple is still visible from the surface, jutting up from the aptly named Pool of Tears. The imagery of these ancient ruins being pulled under the water seems in a way similar to Venice, Italy, where flooding, unstable sediment layers, and plate tectonics have all played a role in causing the city to slowly sink over time. Perhaps the most noticeable landmark of both the Black Morass and the Blasted Lands is the Dark Portal itself, an infernal gateway linking Azeroth to Outland. The fell energies of the portal, not to mention the energy radiating from it after its destruction during the Second War, corrupted the Black Morass, once filled with life and vegetation, into a desolate wasteland. The Dark Portal would play an influential role in the Burning Crusade after sitting dormant during Warcraft 3 and Classic WoW, but it appears that whether or not the portal is active has no bearing on its corruptive effects, as regrowth of the marsh or forest has proved to be nearly impossible. While perhaps not the most noticeable of the areas within the Swamp of Sorrows, the shifting mire is one of the most important to discuss when we're talking about marsh geography. According to the drain eye of the harborage, the sediment of this part of the swamp moves unpredictably and can shift the course of the channels and bogs here. This brings us to another question about the Swamp of Sorrows. How is the ocean involved in the changing landscape here? Well, according to the WoW RPG book, Lands of Conflict, the ocean seeps into the swamp, making it a salty marsh, which in itself is compelling evidence, and I believe this diagram further illustrates my point. While there are no direct inlets or bays into the Swamp of Sorrows before the Cataclysm, I think less visible sources, including groundwater mixing and infiltration, are responsible for the marsh slowly taking on a saltwater composition. Additionally, there are no rivers or snowmelt runoffs here to propel water out to sea, meaning saltwater would have an easier time filtering into the soggy basins of the marsh. On the other hand, the Black Morass, while very similar in landscape and vegetation, has no direct access to the sea, which in my opinion means it would be a lot harder to get the same saltwater ecosystem going. I think this salt content could explain the difference in wildlife we see in the Black Morass instance, and it could also explain why the orcs didn't just die of dehydration after coming through the portal like they likely would have if this was just a giant salt marsh. Let's go ahead and tackle the final piece of this soggy puzzle by exploring some of the geologic history of these two zones. One important detail I'd like to point out is the difference in elevation between the two zones. The Black Morass is much lower in comparison to the Swamp of Sorrows, and that's something you can see in-game when you travel through the narrow pass linking the two areas. This is a major factor for why there is no drainage out of this lower half of the swamp. It has one of the lowest elevations in the game, especially compared to the surrounding mountains. But how did it get this way? I think the answer is plate extension. As we've talked about in previous episodes of this series, tectonic plates can move and shift deep underground over long periods of time. In some cases, these plates can be slowly pulled apart and can create something known as a Horst and Graben topography. As the crust is stretched apart, some regions of the crust end up dropping down below others, creating an alternating system of raised and sunken crust areas. I think this landscape can be seen in-game when looking at the mountain range in between the Black Morass and Zul'Gurub, and also the ranges dividing the Swamp of Sorrows, Deadwind Pass, and Duskwood. This theory satisfies a lot of the geologic questions here, but one that remains is, why isn't the Swamp of Sorrows boxed in by walls of mountains on all sides? Well, we have reason to believe that in the past perhaps it was, as we can still see the remnants of some landforms appearing as islands off the coast of the zone. Additionally, since this region is a swamp and is filled with countless murky channels, it is possible that this region could have once been a much more substantial river delta, carrying tons of water from the Red Ridge and Brightwood Mountains out to sea, which over time would cut through the Horst and Graben landscape and allow the water to reach the sea. The Swamp of Sorrows and the Blasted Lands are two of the most mysterious and out-of-the-way places in WoW Classic. But next time you're sent out here to collect some dream dust, or venture through the Dark Portal, maybe you'll see this part of Azeroth in a whole new way. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about the geology of the Swamp of Sorrows and the Black Morass in this episode. If you did enjoy it, make sure to like the video, comment down below with your thoughts, subscribe to join the Jedi Order, and until next time, peace.